They're afraid to think about their parents dying. They're afraid to think about their parents getting older. I interviewed several adult children for my book, and this was a common theme among those who had not had conversations with their parents about their parents' finances.
Hello, everyone. I'm Denise Gorant. Welcome to Bite Your Tongue, the podcast. Thanks for joining me for another conversation about the ins and outs of parenting adult children. Your diapering days are over. Now it's time to consider when to bite your tongue. So let's get started. Welcome to another episode of Bite Your Tongue, the podcast. Today we're talking about money, but in a different way. Your money, not your kids' money. We're welcoming Cameron Huddleston, an award-winning journalist with over 20 years writing on personal finance. In fact, U.S. News & World Report named her one of the top finance experts to follow on Twitter. So don't worry, we'll share her Twitter feed. But we wanted to talk to her today because she just released a book called Mom and Dad, We Need to Talk. The target for the book is our kids, of course. But I want to switch the conversation with Cameron today and call it, Hey, adult kids, we need to talk. I've lost both of my parents, so I know some of the ins and outs of dealing with all the issues after someone dies. I've been working very hard on trying to get my own life organized, so if anything happens, my kids will know my wishes, where they can locate all my financial documents, passwords, contacts, etc. I know I'm still behind the 8 ball in getting prepared, and that's why I really want this episode to focus on what we, as parents of adult children, need to do so when that time comes, things will be easy for our children. Many of us are grateful we're healthy and we don't think about preparing for the future. So this episode should really help all of us become financial grown-ups. Welcome, Cameron. I know I've given a long intro here, but if you want to tell us just a little bit more about yourself and maybe why you're so passionate about your topic. I know you've had some personal experiences and you're welcome to share those.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be talking about this topic. And I am the poster child for having these conversations because my father died at the age of 61, and he was in a second marriage, and he died without a will. And he was an attorney to boot, so he should have known better.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease at the age of 65. I was 35 at the time. I had 2 young kids. I now have 3 kids. And so, I mean, you're right. We all like to think that we're going to live these long, healthy lives. A lot of us like to, think that we're never even going to die. So there's no need to have these conversations. But they're so important because things happened, because health issues happen, because death happens, and we have to be prepared. I've been a personal finance journalist for 20 years, and so I've a lot of experience writing about money, but I really focused on family money conversations because of my experience with my own parents, and really because I made the mistake of not talking to them about their finances soon enough. And I don't want other people to make that same mistake. You can't wait for the emergency to have these conversations. That's not the time to have these conversations. These conversations need to happen while you are healthy and while there isn't an emergency, and they need to happen while you're relatively young so that you and your children can start planning for those emergencies, so you can plan for your death, so that your children can be prepared to deal with what you leave behind.
You're so right. I can't even tell you how important I think this is. And of all the books I've looked at, your book makes it very simple to understand. And it puts it in such a straightforward way that I bought 2 copies, one for each of my children to give them for Christmas. And I also think that when someone dies, when you don't have, or even get sick, or isn't able to take care of their things as they get older, you can enjoy that person a lot more. You can celebrate their death and allow yourself to grieve when you're not worrying about all this paperwork, because it can take up so much of your life and so much of your ability to grieve.
You're right. It's an absolute nightmare. I lost my mother in January of this year, and even though I knew everything about her finances because I had been managing them for several years, it was still a lot. Just dealing with the things that had to be done, filing a life insurance claim, closing accounts, dealing with the probate process. That was a lot and that was stressful, and trying to manage that stress while grieving was incredibly difficult. I can't imagine figuring out what sort of assets my mom had, what sort of financial accounts she had, what were the passwords to accounts, was there life insurance, how do we pay for the funeral? If I had to deal with that on top of grieving, that would have made it so much harder. Like I said, just handling those things, um, that I had to handle and knowing what I knew was hard enough.
Right.
Not knowing anything about my mom's finances would have made it so much more difficult.
Well, there's always something. My mom was very prepared and we worked with her a lot on that. But still, when it came to the end, we could not find her car title. It was just like we searched everywhere and we just never thought of, oh my gosh, you have to know where the car title is. So we had to, fly back to Ohio, go to the whatever vehicle thing. It was just a pain in the neck. But anyway, we're going to get started here. And before we go into the details of what we need to prepare, I noticed on your blog, I think it was October 26th, you actually did something exactly on this topic, kids, we need to talk. What to do when your adult children don't want to discuss your finances. And that's sort of been my position. And some of it's because my kids don't live where I live. So every time we get together, I say, okay, let's get together and talk about this. And they say, Mom, every time we get together, you just want to talk about death. So walk us through what to say, what not to say, and how we sort of approach this subject with them, because I think there's some guilt in them too. They don't want us to think, oh, they want our money, or, oh, we're going to tell them they've got to take care of us because we haven't saved enough money. They're scared to have this conversation.
They are. And that's the first thing you need to know when you're trying to talk to your kids about your finances, about your estate plan, about final wishes. You don't want to start by making the conversation about death because you're right. Your kids are afraid to think about life without you. They're afraid to think about their parents dying. They're afraid to think about their parents getting older. I interviewed several adult children for my book, and this was a common theme among those who had not had conversations with their parents about their parents' finances. They said to me, I don't want to have to think about my parents dying. And that's why they had avoided the conversation. And so, if you want to talk to your kids about this thing, you don't want to start out by saying, kids, I'm not going to be here forever. Or, kids, I'm getting older. I might need some help someday. Don't start out on the wrong foot. Maybe you want to talk about your retirement instead. Like, kids, here's what I'm planning for my retirement. I thought you'd like to know, how I'm going to be prepared, whether I'm planning on moving, whether I'm going to be around to, help with the kids, help with the grandkids. You can start out that way as opposed to talking about, ooh, the icky subject of death or aging, and the idea that your kids might have to help you out someday. Start it on a more positive note, your retirement planning, or maybe some of the things that you've done to be prepared for emergencies, or how you're planning so you won't be a burden on your kids, whether you have a way to pay for long-term care if you ever need it. Start on a positive note, get your kids comfortable with the idea of, thinking about your future and what role they might play before you really hit them with the heavy subjects of aging and death.
And here's where all my stuff is.
And here's where all my stuff is. But you could, if you want to, though, that's kind of a slightly easier way to get into this is to talk about your stuff. I know a lot of adult kids kind of dread the idea of having to deal with their parents' stuff. And maybe you can mention to them, hey, I've been kind of, taking an inventory of the things I have in my house. My insurance agent told me to do this. We have to file a homeowner's claim. Every time you turn on the news now, you're hearing about flooding and hurricanes. And so you could say, hey, I was prompted to take a home inventory just in case we ever have to file a claim. And it got me thinking, kids, is there anything in particular that you really want to keep? Or is there anything, maybe there are things that you want now? Hey, you just bought a new house, kids, and we're trying to get rid of some stuff that we don't need. Are there things that you really want? I'm happy to maybe give them to you now. So you could start it that way. Make that the beginning of your conversation. And then you kind of
Right.
get into the nitty gritty of, by the way, we met with an attorney recently and we have a will and I want you to know where it is. And we have a life insurance policy and I want you to know where it is. Or, make the conversation about emergency planning. Guys, there's still a pandemic going on. We're vaccinated, but people are still ending up in the hospital, even though they're vaccinated. And we just want you to know if something were to happen to us and we were in the hospital, here's where the documents are. Here's how we pay the bills. Don't worry, we're being safe, but things happen and we want to be prepared. And so you're approaching it from a slightly different angle other than let's talk about when we die.
Right. I think that's a good idea. I've got to rephrase how I'm talking about this because also, and I think most of my listeners have adult kids, in their 20s to early 30s. And a lot of those kids are really hard into their careers and they aren't even thinking about the things legally that they have to do for themselves. So even when you tell them this is where my will is, I have a good feeling it goes in one ear and out the other because they don't want to listen. So I think it's going over it several times too. But anyway, let's get into what we want to talk about. So I think the whole thing is really about estate planning. And I want to know from you, what are the steps my listeners should do now? And we can take the top ones because I did download your emergency document. I think it's 36 pages, so it was a lot. I want to go one by one. Let's start with the top things that you really think as, parents that are getting, I don't even want to say getting older, starting in your 50s. Actually, you should probably do this in your 40s. But when your kids are adults and you really have to talk to them, what are the pieces of information you have to have in place? And how do you go about getting those pieces of information?
Okay, so estate planning documents are key. And I know a lot of people think when they hear the word estate planning that this is something that only wealthy people do. But that's not the case. Everyone, everyone needs estate planning documents. Older adults need them, younger adults need them. And let's start with the will, which is probably the most obvious. You need something in writing that spells out who gets what when you die. If you do not have a will or a trust, the state has one for you. State laws will dictate who gets your assets, who gets your property when you die. And there might be people in your family who get your things and you don't want them to get your
Right.
things. And you don't want your family to fight over who gets what. And that's what's going to happen if you die without a will. So think of a will as a gift to your children and your family members because you're making it easier for them. You are telling them what your wishes are. You are telling them who gets what. And I know a lot of times older adults are worried about talking to their kids about their will because they're afraid it's going to lead to fighting. Or their kids are going to want to know, well, what exactly are they getting? Is one of them going to be getting more than the others? Well, you know what? You don't have to tell your kids what they're getting, but they need to know that you have a will and they need to know where it is and how they can access it when you die.
How often should someone update their will? Because I know we did a will several years ago. Now the kids are a different age, and my husband's saying, gee, we should look at that again and update it.
You should, if there have been changes in your life, maybe you've gotten divorced, maybe your spouse has passed away, maybe you drafted that will when your kids were young and you named an executor of your state who was another family member, and now your kids are old enough and you want to name one of your children to be your executor. When there have been life changes, that's a good time to look at your will and see if you need to update it. I mean, my husband and I have actually written a will or had an attorney write a will for us, and then we had to update it after we had our third child and we need to make some changes. So we've already gone through the process twice. We'll probably go through it at least one more time in our lives. But when there have been changes in your life, that's a good time to look at your will. And if it's been, 10, 15 years since you've written that will, pull it out and see if there's some changes that need to be made.
And that's an interesting subject because you say that you had a lawyer do it for you. I've noticed that there's a lot of online DIY sites now. Susie Orman has one for like $79. You get your will and I think your trust and all this sort of stuff. How good are those, or do you absolutely have to spend the money to go see an attorney to have this done?
There are some DIY products out there that are pretty good. One that is particularly good is a service called Trust and Will. I've actually spoken with one of the founders of this company. They've worked closely with attorneys to create their product, and they really walk you through the process that you need to take to make your will valid. You'll print it out and you list what state you're in. And so they'll tell you what specifically needs to be done, whether it needs to be notarized, whether there need to be witnesses. And I do think that's a good service. State bar associations also provide oftentimes free wills that you can download that are specific to your state's law. So that's another option. Like you can type in your state, Georgia State Bar Association, and see if they have a free will that you can download. And if you do not have a complicated situation, then these DIY options can be an affordable way or a free way to get a will. If your family situation, if your financial situation is more complicated, then it can be smarter to meet with an attorney to draft a will or to draft a trust. And I would really recommend that if you are wanting to create a living trust, that you meet with an attorney, because there are a lot of steps that are involved with that. You have to transfer the property in your name into the trust while you are still living. And that can be kind of complicated. And it's helpful to have a professional who can walk you through the process so that everything is done correctly.
And there are different kinds of trust too. I've heard of revocable trust, irrevocable trust. All of that would need to be sorted out.
Right, right. And again, it's good to have a professional help you figure out what is best for you and your situation.
Right. And I really love that you said, this whole estate planning isn't just for wealthy people. I was talking to a friend recently who doesn't have a will, who's my age. She doesn't have children. She's never been married. She said, well, I really don't have anything. I rent my apartment. And I said, without a will, they may just lock your door and not let anyone in to even go through your stuff until your closest relative or the courts decide who goes in. Is that true?
Will they lock the door? I don't know, but you've got something. I mean, she probably has belongings, and maybe these are family heirlooms. Maybe she's got some money in a retirement account and she would like to see it go to a charitable organization. You should name someone.
I even tell my kids they should have a will. If they can easily
Yes.
go online and do a will, why not?
And if your kids have kids, they definitely need a will because they need to name a guardian to take care of their kids if they're no longer around to take care of them. Because not only does the state determine who gets your things when you die without a will, but state law is also going to determine who gets your kids. And someone
Mhm.
might be named their guardian, and your kids don't want that person to be raising their kids.
All right, let's go to the next item. So a will is, I want to say pretty common. Hopefully, fingers crossed, most people have one. They probably should be updated. And I will share in episode notes and our website, these different sites you gave us. But what's next?
Power of attorney. This is so important. I think it's even more important than the will. Power of attorney is someone you name to make financial and legal transactions and decisions for you if you can't. It is so important to have a general, durable power of attorney. General means that you are giving your agent the power, like broad powers. It's not limited to specific financial transactions. I mean, sometimes people will name just a limited power of attorney to sign real estate documents. If you're going to be out of the country and you're selling property and you need an attorney to sign those, real estate closing documents for you, you can name a limited power of attorney. You want to give your power of attorney, though, broad powers. in case something happens to you. You also want it to be durable, meaning that power of attorney is going to go into effect once it's signed, and it's going to remain in effect if you become mentally incapacitated. And this is, you want someone to be able to make financial transactions and decisions for you if you have dementia, Alzheimer's, any sort of cognitive decline. I know some people think that it should be a springing power of attorney, meaning that a doctor is going to have to, testify that you're no longer competent enough before your power of attorney can take action. But that just makes it more complicated for your power of attorney to start getting involved and helping with your finances. So you want that general, durable power of attorney. And I know people might think, oh, well, I don't want to name my kids power of attorney right now. I'm still plenty competent to manage my finances. And if I sign this document now, they're going to have power. Well, yes and no. First of all, your kids are going to have an original of that power of attorney document to show to financial institutions before any financial institution is going to let them start making financial transactions for you. Okay. So you could say to your kids, look, I'm naming you my power of attorney now, but I'm going to keep these documents in whatever, the lockbox in my home safe. Here are the situations in which you can access these documents and start acting as my power of attorney. If you don't trust your kids to be your power of attorney, then you shouldn't name them your power of attorney. Pick someone else. But it's important that you name someone now because you have to be mentally competent to sign these documents. If you don't have a power of attorney named, and let's say you have a stroke or you have Alzheimer's disease and someone needs to make financial decisions for you, they're not going to be able to at this point because you're no longer competent enough to sign those documents. Then they're going to have to go through the court process to be named your conservator or guardian. And this can be expensive. It can be time consuming. It can be emotionally challenging because you're putting your parent on trial to prove that your parent is no longer competent enough to make financial decisions. It's horrible. It is absolutely horrible. Don't do it to yourself. Don't do it to your family members. Have this document in place. Choose someone you trust who can be your power of attorney. If you have more than one kid, you can name more than one child power of attorney, but I would encourage you to make sure that they can act independently of each other, meaning that they don't all have to be in the same room to sign documents. That just makes it more complicated. Really, a lot of times attorneys are going to say it's best to just name one person your power of attorney and then have a backup. And with this document, you should meet with an attorney. Do not use the downloadable documents because oftentimes these are too general. They might not comply with your state's laws, and you want to make sure you get this right. You want to talk with an attorney so you can discuss what sort of powers you want to give your agent, what type of power of attorney. So important to get this document right because if you do become mentally incompetent, you want your agent to be able to act on your behalf. You don't want your agent to have to jump through all these hurdles. You don't want some bank to say, well, where in the world did you get this document? It's like from some online source, and I don't know if we can even honor this. If an attorney has drafted it, your child can get on the phone with an attorney and say, hey, attorney, please call the bank and let them know that this is a legitimate document, go to bat for me with the bank and let them know that, this is a legitimate document. So
I have a couple of questions. I think one confusing thing when people hear power of attorney, they think it has to be an attorney, but really
no.
it can be one of your children or someone you trust, a close friend who you think can handle this, right?
Yes.
Okay. And number two is when you say general, does this document also cover your health care? No. So that's the next document.
So you also need to have a healthcare power of attorney. They're also called healthcare proxies, healthcare surrogate, different document. You need to name someone to make medical decisions for you if you can't. And this document doesn't go into effect until you actually cannot make medical decisions on your own. So if you're in the hospital and you're perfectly capable of talking to your doctor about your healthcare situation, the doctor's not going to ask to speak to your healthcare proxy. But if you have had a stroke and you are in a coma you need someone who can speak to your doctor on your behalf. You need someone who can decide whether to keep you on life support. And that gets you to another document you need, which is a living will, which spells out what sort of end of life medical treatment you do or do not want. It's important to have this document so that your family isn't arguing over whether to keep you on life support. They know what your wishes are. And then that healthcare proxy can say, yes, indeed, we want to remove mom from life support. Her living will states that she does not want any sort of life support. So you need to have all of those documents in place, drafted and signed while you are healthy and mentally competent.
So I want to ask you about the healthcare proxy, because I know when my parents were ill, and I also took care of a couple aunts, I was their healthcare proxy. But I needed that even when I wanted to talk to the doctor, like they would,
Yes.
because of HIPAA. So I used to, maybe you're going to think I'm crazy, and they didn't really know what it was, but I put their living will and their healthcare proxy on a flash drive on their keychain. Because they didn't live near me. So if they ended up in the hospital, I would say, look on her keychain, there's a flash drive, you'll find their living will and their healthcare proxy. And that allowed me to talk to the hospital or talk to the doctor, even though they were competent, okay? But I wanted to give my input, or I wanted to know what was going on. Because sometimes when you reach it, the hospital can be confusing. You can lose your mind just being in the hospital for 4 days.
Yes. And I love that idea. That is brilliant. The flash drive on the keychain, that's an incredible idea. I mean, it's a good idea for you to give a copy of your living will and, the document that says who your healthcare proxy is to your primary care provider. But yes, you could end up in the hospital and they're not going to have that document. And you never know what hospital you're going to end up in. Gosh, keeping it on a flash drive on a keychain is a great idea. But you do need that. I mean, every time I took my mom to the hospital, to the doctor's office, it's the first question they
Right,
asked me.
right,
Are you your mom's healthcare power of attorney? Are you her financial power of attorney? And I could
right,
answer yes. And
right,
then they would say, does she have a living will?
right.
Yes, she does. And I could refer to it to see what she wanted, what her wishes were.
Right. But I just want to make that clear with the healthcare proxy. It isn't only when they're incapacitated, it's when you want to be involved in their healthcare as well.
Right. Because my mother, even in the early stage of Alzheimer's disease, really needed someone there to help her navigate her medical treatment.
Where?
And I was always there with her and I was able to sit in the room with her because I was her healthcare proxy.
Well, and the way the medical profession is going, I tell everyone, and I do this, I don't think you ever should go to the doctor by yourself. Having another set of ears there listening when you're getting a diagnosis or something is valuable, whatever age you're at 20, 30, 40, 50, 100. Having a second set of ears, because everything happens so fast.
Right. And if you're panicking, it's easy to forget what the
Exactly.
doctor just told you.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, so another piece of advice that someone once gave me is keep your will close to you and safe and give your living will out to everyone you know.
Yeah, I think the attorney we met with when we were helping my mom draft her documents, I think she might have even said you could, wallpaper the bathroom with the
Right,
living
exactly.
will. But that power of attorney document, that has to be safe and secure because
Safe and secure.
if the wrong person gets their hands on it, that is really dangerous because they do have a lot of power and they can go in and they can, if they want to go to the bank and say, hi, I'm Jane Smith's daughter and I am her power of attorney and she was recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's and I need to have access to her bank account now. I mean, gosh, it's it's a recipe for disaster if the wrong person gets their hands on that document.
Exactly. So we've gone through the, I would say, top four: the trust, the power of attorney, the healthcare proxy, the living will. What other things do you think we should have organized that will make things easier for our children?
From that point, what you need to do is give your kids as detailed information as possible about your finances. And I know that probably sounds horrifying to a lot of people because you're thinking, well, my kids don't need to know how much money I have in my bank account. They don't need to know what my balance is on my credit card. And you're right, they don't need to know nitty gritty details like that at this point, as long as you are still capable of managing your finances on your own, but they at least need to know, where do you bank?
Hmm.
Um, do you still have a mortgage? What are your sources of income, especially if you are in retirement? And you don't necessarily have to tell them all of this, but
Hmm.
you need to write it down. Like you mentioned, that I have this in case of an emergency
Hmm.
document that you can download from my website. You can download it, fill it out, put it someplace safe with those legal documents, and tell your kids how to access it and under what circumstances they can access that information. Because if something does happen to you, your kids need to know how to pay the bills. I mean, are you writing checks or are they set up to be paid automatically? They need to know those passwords. They need to know, are you getting, what's the size of your social security benefit check each month, and will it cover all of your expenses? They need to know what your social security number is. They need to know what your Medicare number is. They need to know where that Medicare card is. They need to know whether you have a Medicare Advantage plan or a Medicare supplement plan that also helps with your medical costs. They need to know as much information as possible if they have to help with your care as you age. You don't want them playing detective. And here's a good story why. I mean, I did not have detailed conversations with my mom about her finances before she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. We met with the attorney as she was starting to show signs of memory loss. We made sure those legal documents were drafted. We went to the bank. We let the bank know I was her power of attorney. And I slowly started to get involved. She didn't have online banking, so I was able to set up online banking for her, and I was able to monitor her account behind the scenes to make sure she wasn't making mistakes, to make sure she wasn't giving away all of her money. But I had to play detective and figure out what all of her assets were. And there was an investment account that I didn't know existed until it was about to be turned over to the state as an unclaimed asset. This account had
Much.
$50,000 in it.
Oh my.
$50,000. And I didn't even know it existed. And then I had to jump through all these hurdles in order to get access to the account, even though I was her power of attorney. I mean, they were super strict about it. And I was finally able to get access to the account. And at this point, I had moved her into a memory care facility. And so I just cashed out the account and used that money to pay for nearly a year's worth of care.
Here for her.
But
Hmm.
but these are things that you can avoid by making that list of all of your accounts and the account numbers and the phone numbers for the financial institutions. And if there are financial professionals that you work with, an attorney, a financial planner, an accountant, um, you know, a list of all the property you own, where the titles to your cars are, where the deed to your house is, where the marriage certificate is, where the divorce decree is, where your birth certificate is, because your kids will need this information. They might not need it while you are still living, but when you die, they're going to need this information if they are the executor of their estate and they have to handle everything.
I can't even tell you how much I agree with all that because I also believe, and you sort of alluded to this, you started this with your mother right after she was diagnosed. I feel like the earlier you do it, the better. I had
Yes.
some happenings in my life where I was taking care of some aunts who never married, as I've said before. And as you're getting older, even if it's not full on Alzheimer or dementia, everyone's brain operates differently. And I thought my aunt was perfectly fine. And then I realized that she was giving away $40,000, $50,000 a year, and no one knew this was going on. And so I realized after that, as my parents got older, my other aunts got older, I did get on their bank account. I was a third name on their account so I could see what was going on because I think it's hard for people to admit this is happening to them. That's a really tough situation.
It is, and like you said, even if you don't develop dementia
Right.
as you age, our financial decision making ability does decline with age. So you could be
Right.
perfectly healthy, but you might be giving away a lot more money than you normally would have because that financial decision making ability has declined. You are more prone to become a victim of scams and fraud, and you need someone looking out for you as you age. Even if you're still competent, you need that second set of eyes on your finances. I'm going to mention a service that people can use if they want to. And in full disclosure, I am working with this company. It's called Careful with two L's. And it's the first service that is built to help organize and protect aging adults' daily finances. You can link your bank account, your credit card account to it. It's going to monitor it 24/7 for late and missed payments, duplicate payments, charitable contributions, because yes, you can make one contribution and not realize that there's a little box there that you didn't uncheck, not check, but uncheck. It was already checked for you to make recurring contributions. And now every month, this political campaign or this cause is getting, a, you know, taking a draft out of your bank account because you inadvertently signed up for recurring contributions. It's going to check for um, you know unusual transactions, signs of fraud and scams. It also provides credit and personal data monitoring. And what it also does is it allows you to add people into your circle, family members, trusted financial professionals, and they can see your accounts, they can get alerts when there's something wrong, but it's view only. And so they don't have any actual access to your financial accounts, but they're that second set of eyes. And this is a good way to let your kids see what's going on in your financial accounts so that if they do have to step in and get involved, they already know what bills are being paid each month, and they're getting those alerts. If something happens, and then they can say, oh my gosh, mom, in the app, they can use the app and text you and say, mom, I just noticed that, there's a possible late payment. Is everything okay? Or mom, I just noticed that there was this large gift card purchase that you made. I just want to check in because I know a lot of times scammers ask people to buy gift cards. And so it allows you and your children, your family members, your financial planners, your accountants, your trusted financial plan professionals to all be on the same page and kind of see what's going on. And it gives you that second set of eyes because we can all make mistakes. And especially as we age, unfortunately, we are more prone to making mistakes.
Right. And that's when you say that as we age and our financial literacy and ability to make decisions does wane, I just want to underscore so important because I think those of us in our, late 50s, 60s, 70s, we don't think this is ever going to happen to us. Okay. And that's what's hard. I keep saying to my husband, how do I know when I get to that point? And I just feel like you always have to prepare for it because it's going to be part of your life at some point. And I know some people reach 100 and they can still do everything, but I would rather be prepared before I start making major mistakes.
Right. You should be. You should be prepared because if you can catch those small mistakes, you're going to prevent big financial problems.
Right. Well, we're at about 40 minutes now, and I don't like to go over 45. So I've loved this, and I wish we could talk forever. But I think sharing some of your things on my website and on our episode notes is going to help a lot of people. And I just plead with everyone to pay attention to this. I know you're young, and I know you're healthy, and you're playing tennis and doing all these things. But it's really a good idea to get all of this organized, have it in a place where it's accessible to your children, let them know where it is, that sort of thing. One thing we didn't cover, I just want to ask this about passwords. How do you suggest people save passwords?
Well, I mean, you could do it the old fashioned way. And you can write it on a piece of paper and store it someplace safe. You can put it on your computer if you want. You can use a password protection service such as LastPass. I mean, there are lots of
What do you
services
think of,
online.
what do you think of the password protection services?
Actually, I just started using one. I am old fashioned. I am truly old fashioned, and I have a notebook
Okay.
with all of my passwords written down, and my husband knows where it is. He has everything online. Like he has it stored in the cloud. Um, and honestly, I'm like, oh my gosh, don't let something happen to him because I'm gonna have to like get online and figure it out. And I don't
But
know.
you
It
know
just,
that,
it kind of, it's like, what are you comfortable with and what are your family members comfortable with?
because I'm very much a tech person. My husband is not. And I do have OnePass. And what I did recently, and I think it's genius, but then I worry, oh, someone's going to steal this. I actually have, you can have different vaults in OnePass. So I have a vault called estate planning. And in there are copies of every single one of our documents, plus like your spreadsheet, okay? And then it has a note where you can find the original, so that my kids can access that. And they have like this family emergency thing. So both of my kids know how to access it. My husband has the account too. So if anything happens to us, they can go right into OnePass and everything's right there. I don't know if it's safe or not.
I think it's great, and it should be
Okay.
safe. I mean, really, it's just as safe as my list in a notebook because, I mean, if someone happened to come into my house and find the notebook, I mean, they could steal it. And yes, I mean, certainly, just because it's online doesn't necessarily mean it's unsafe. You just want to make sure that your kids guard those
Well, it's
passwords
in
that
our
you've
safety
given them
deposit
carefully.
box. I like to end my episodes with my guests giving 2 or 3 pieces of advice that they want everyone to leave this episode understanding and knowing. So can you offer our listeners 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you absolutely want to make sure they take away from this podcast?
First, don't wait to have these conversations. They need to happen while you are healthy and relatively young. You don't want to wait for the emergency because emotions are going to be running high and your kids won't have the information they need. You might not have the documents that you need to give your kids the power to help you out with your finances and to make and to make medical decisions for you. So don't wait to have these conversations. These conversations don't need to happen all at once. They can happen over time. You don't want to overload your kids with too much information. Write it down if you don't feel comfortable telling your kids this information. And I would add one more thing that we didn't talk about. It's really important at some point to discuss your final wishes with your children or put
Mhm.
them in writing. Let them know what you want. Do you want to be cremated? Do you want to be buried? Because when you are grieving, you don't want to have to make that sort of decision. You want to be able to follow your parents' wishes. And I'm so glad my mother had this conversation with me several times while she was still mentally competent because I was able to honor her wishes when she died this January. And it really felt good knowing that I was able to do that. My dad never told us. He would jokingly say, sharpen my toes and hammer me into the ground. We never knew what he wanted. And it just made it complicated
Well,
when
and
he
my
died.
husband, my husband always says, a match, a marshmallow, and 2 sticks, and he thinks it's funny. You know what I mean? But it really doesn't help the kids prepare.
No,
And I want to say, I'm sorry about your loss of your mother, but what a strong woman she was to be able to express all that to you. Because sometimes it's hard for people to even ask for what they want.
she did. And I'm glad she did because really it felt so good to me knowing that I was able to do what she wanted in the end.
Exactly, exactly. Well, Cameron, thank you so much. This is great information and also makes me a little crazy because I know I've got to get more and more organized. Every time I think I've got it together, I know there's another step. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks to all our listeners for joining us today. I hope you got as much out of today's podcast as I did. We will have all the key information from the episode in our episode notes. And if you need a holiday present for your kids, order a copy of Mom and Dad, We Need to Talk today. My guess is that if your kids are anything like mine, they're not thinking about what's next and all the information they need to know or where it is should anything happen. And as they say, if you bring an umbrella, it won't rain. So get prepared. Let's all miss that rainstorm. So as most podcasters say, all this information is coming to you free of charge. Every other week we give you great stuff, right? So what you can do for us is follow us on social media, give us a review, and please share this episode with friends. That's not much, right? Help us out. Thanks again to Connie Fisher, who's doing all our engineering work. And until next time, remember, sometimes you just have to bite your tongue.